this latest episode of Infusions of Light Radio. I'm so delighted that you are joining us today for the topic, Is There an Adult in the Room? So this topic has everything to do with the first phase of somatic awakening, which I call Gestalt Somatic Awakening. And we're going to be diving into this topic deeply today. But for those of you who aren't quite familiar with somatic awakening, I'd first like to give you an overall understanding and definition of what that is. So somatic awakening is a modality that has been born through me, through my own experiences, and as well as through many teachers, those who have been not in body, as well as those who are in body. We'll talk more about that in a moment, especially in regard to Gestalt Somatic Awakening. So somatic awakening in general, what it is that it is a mind, body, spirit healing modality that I do a lot in my own practice. I'm teaching more and more people these days what it's all about. I'm also in the middle of a somatic awakening practitioner program. And that's the modality. This is the modality that I'm going to be teaching primarily in the upcoming launch of Sophia Healing Academy, which is going to be happening in April. So somatic awakening also is literally a spiritual practice that once you learn it, that you can actually bring it into your own life. So you don't necessarily have to have a session with me or work with another person in order to understand this. But if you have just enough understanding and training in it, you can actually bring it into your own life. And that's one of the things that's so exciting about it. So let me talk about the 3 phases of somatic awakening, and then we'll dive into the first phase today. So the first phase, as I said before, is Gestalt Somatic Awakening. And its primary modus operandi, so to speak, is to help us understand and to stabilize the parts inside of ourselves that can be very negative. The negative voices that say things like we're not good enough, or that we have to push ourselves really, really hard beyond our capacity. And the way that it does this is, first of all, by bringing awareness, deep, deep awareness and understanding to these parts, and being in relationship to these parts from what I call our higher adult consciousness. So in essence, this is a part of our higher awareness that can bring some stabilizing, understanding, compassion into the room, so to speak. Then we go into the second phase of somatic awakening, which I call the practice. This is really what we can call the entree, or the meat, so to speak, or tofu if you're vegetarian, of somatic awakening. And in this aspect, we connect into even higher vibration of our higher self, which I call the higher self witness consciousness, and multiple levels of vibration above that. And we bring it into our somatic body. And I defined somatic as the interface between the physical, emotional, and energetic aspects of ourself. When we bring this energy down into our body, what we're doing is we're actually connecting it to the part that needs our attention the most. And when that happens, an incredible healing relationship and alchemical transformation can occur, which can vastly change and shift our life into healing and awakening. Then we go into the third phase of somatic awakening, which I call quantum somatic awakening. And it is here that we engage in perceptions that are outside of our normal range, so to speak. We connect into all sorts of vastly higher vibrational information, everything from past lives, future lives, quantum awareness, and much, much more. In essence, what we're doing is that we're connecting into what's possible when we engage our higher self and the power and the magic that's possible with our higher self into our everyday life to bring in even more healing, awakening, evolution. So today, as I said before, we're going to talk about Gestalt Somatic Awakening in a little bit more depth so you can understand it. So in this process, what we first want to do is to understand that when we have these negative voices running our life, whatever those are, we're going to talk a lot more about what they are. Just as I said before, it could be a voice that says that we're not good enough, or a voice that really vastly limits our potential, or whatever it is. When we have these voices running our life, or what I like to say, driving the car of our life, so to speak, it can cause so much suffering. And I discovered that no matter how much healing energy that we bring in from our higher self, if we don't have, first of all, a cognitive understanding, an emotional understanding, a deeper somatic understanding of these parts, where they came from, as well as bringing in stabilizing, healing awareness and holding to them, then our life can literally be one day of suffering after another, because these subconscious parts are running our life. So a lot of times people will, and I know I've been guilty of this as well, will go into this perception of, well, I want to get rid of these parts. I want to should them away or wish them away. Or if you're of the new age ilk, I'm going to positively affirm them away. And of course, positive affirmations can be helpful. But what I've discovered is that there's something deeper that needs our attention. And if we don't give these parts that are underneath these memories, these aspects, these experiences that are underneath the parts, the attention that they need, then these parts will continue. We can think all that we want these parts away. And again, that can be helpful, but they don't truly go away until they are deeply met. And that's what Gestalt Somatic Awakening is really doing. It has been created to help us understand, stabilize, and heal these parts so that we can bring balance and stability into all aspects of our life. So, with Gestalt Somatic Awakening, it actually came on after the second phase, which I call the practice, came on board. That phase came out of my own dark night of the soul experience, a very powerful connection to Mary Magdalene, as well as divine feminine energy, divine mother, teaching me these different nuances of the practice. And this part came on board whenever I started engaging the practice of somatic awakening in my medical practice, in my mind, body, spirit practice. And I realized, oh, people need a lot more support. So what happened is that I really fell back into my own experience of healing and leaned into two modalities that I had experienced and had been trained in, and started culminating these different modalities into something new. So I want to give credit where credit is due. So these two modalities that Gestalt Somatic Awakening is based on are, number one, voice dialogue by Hal and Sidra Stone, as well as Gestalt therapy by Fritz Perls. So with that said, before we go into the heart of the practice, I'd like to talk a little bit more about these parts so you can understand them, because it's really important to understand these parts at a very deep level in order to bring healing to them. So the first thing that I think is important for you to understand is that we have numerous different aspects, or we can call them parts or negative ways of being, that are a part of our ego. If you keep in mind that the ego is trying to protect us, trying to help us survive, right? All of these parts in some way are trying to help us and trying to help us survive, even if we don't quite understand how they're trying to do that at the onset. So when we look at all of these parts from this egoic perspective, we can see that we have a whole landscape, many different aspects of ourself that can come in when we get triggered or activated. Mostly they're in our subconscious until we become aware of them. And then when they get activated, they start running their program. Again, this can be many different things, as I've said before. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to give you an example of how this works, because all of these parts, from my own experience and my 20-some odd years of practice, as well as all the mentorship that I've had from many different psychologists and teachers along the path, what I've discovered is that they come from these deep experiences of heightened stress and or trauma. So I'd like to give you an example of one of these experiences. Now, keep in mind that this is just one story, and there can be many different stories and many different parts that can be created. So in this example, there's a 4-year-old girl, and she had an emotionally abusive and avoidant father. Now, some of the time he would show up in very loving and kind and gentle ways, but the majority of the time he would show up in this emotionally abusive and or avoidant. So he was avoiding contact and deep connection with her. However, she loved him very, very much, and she really cherished the times when he showed up for her. And so she started trying everything that she could think of to get his attention. And sometimes it worked, but again, the majority of the time, it just didn't work. And she was really young to quite understand that what was happening wasn't so much about her, it was about her father's trauma and his own issues in his life. But because she was so young and she didn't quite understand this, and because her father was so important to her, she made it about her. And this is very common with young children. They make it about themselves. And she believed that she wasn't worthy of love and that she had to try very, very hard in order to get anyone's love, including her father's. And so from this experience that came on, or that started whenever she was 4, and this part that came on when she was 4 years old, this part continued on throughout her childhood, teenage years, young adult years, on into adulthood. And this part was very anxious. It was over-attached. It was very clingy because it believed that she wasn't worthy of love and that she had to work very, very hard in order to receive love. And as you can imagine, this is very painful. She believes that she's not worthy of love, that she has to work very, very hard. And this continued on and on throughout her life, through all of her relationships, especially romantic relationships. And romantic relationships were full of strife and sorrow and anxiety, until one day she realized, this can't go on anymore. Something has to give. I'm not going to be doing this anymore. What do I need to do in order for this to shift? And she learned ways in which to actually be with this part so that it's no longer in charge. This is why Gestalt Somatic Awakening. It is one of those ways that we can learn how to actually, first of all, understand these parts, understand where they came from, understand how they're trying to protect us, so that then we can be in relationship with them from this higher adult consciousness perspective, so that they can feel seen, understood, receive compassion, receive the healing that they need, so that they can be stabilized and they can eventually soften. Now, what I'd like to do is I'd like to expand this out a little bit more so that you can understand some of the common parts that we have in our society. Now, I'm just going to use a few here. Again, we have so many, and it took me a while to figure out which ones to talk about, because there's so many different aspects of us that can cause chaos, that are caused from these deeper traumatic or very, very stressful situations. So the first thing I just want to talk about is the opposite of the anxious one being the one that we were just talking about with the younger girl. She believed that she had to work really, really hard in order to gain love. So in attachment theory, this is called the anxious one. It can also be called the clingy one, right? The opposite of that is the avoidant one, the one who avoids love, the one who actually finds protection by not opening their heart, but actually wanting love at the same time. And believe it or not, the anxious ones and the avoidant ones tend to find one another and have relationships. And that can be very, very painful, especially if they're not aware of it, or if one person is aware of it, but the other person isn't aware of it or isn't willing to take responsibility for looking at their role and all of that. So it's really, really important to come into awareness of both of these parts, so that wherever, if you identify with one of these, so wherever you are on that spectrum, that you can bring healing to it, so that then you can open to actually having a good, loving, romantic relationship. So the other part I want to talk about, there's just 3 other parts I want to talk about just to give you other perspectives, is the controller. So the controller is very popular in Western culture. The controller is trying to control reality so that they're safe. So that means hyper controlling self in the sense of what you do, what you don't do, what's allowed, what's not allowed. There can be lots of rules that the controller has, as well as controlling everyone else. And if you're on the outside of that, and this person is trying to control you, it can feel really obnoxious. But keep in mind that the controller, again, is trying to protect itself by controlling reality. The next one is the rebel. So the rebel rebels against anything that feels stifling, that feels controlling. Again, this is the opposite of the controller, or it feels like anyone or anything is encroaching upon them. So the rebel creates protection by pushing things away, by rebelling against, right? And there's a lot of that that's going on in today's world. The other very common Western civilization part is the overachiever. The overachiever is constantly going, constantly doing, constantly achieving. And they're doing this as a way of protection, again, because they're too busy to feel. They're also trying to get to a state of perfection in their achievement so that they can feel worthy of love, typically. So the list goes on and on and on. And again, the ego is literally filled with so many parts. It's a landscape. And some of these parts can be positive, but mostly they're dysfunctional and they can drive us crazy. So the secret, in order to be free, of course, is to bring healing to these parts. So coming back to Gestalt Somatic Awakening. So in this process, you are guided to literally connect with this part. So say, for instance, you're moving through life, your partner triggers you, your coworker triggers you, this part is running, it's off and going, I'm not good enough, or he doesn't love me, and I need to, what's going on, and right? So if we can get quiet enough, we can start to understand, oh, it's this part that's running. So Gestalt Somatic Awakening helps us connect to the part, what it is, how it ticks, what its motives are, as well as the traumatic experience that created it and how it's trying to protect you. So I want to talk about protection a little bit, because a lot of times people go, how does this part that says that I'm not good enough is trying to protect me? It's like, what? It doesn't make any sense. So the first thing I just want to say is that keep in mind that these parts are created at the level of maturity that the traumatic experience happened. So if we were an infant or 2 years old or 5 years old, however old we were, the part was created to help us at that time deal with and often survive a very, very difficult aspect of life. So let's go ahead and go back to the father and the girl, the 4-year-old girl and the dysfunctional father. So in this situation, the girl viewed her father as omnipotent, right? And this is very common with young girls and fathers, especially in this kind of situation where he loves sometimes and other times is not available. So from her perspective, he was everything, as well as he was a primary caretaker for her. He provided a roof over her head. He provided food for her to eat. He provided stability in many different ways. And so for her, at the level of 4 years old, it was very unsafe to make it about him or even to understand that it was about him. So at 4 years old, the only way that she could understand the situation is that it had to be about her. And there's something that's dysfunctional and wrong with her. So when we can actually see this bigger perspective, and understand that these parts are created when we're really young. We weren't in adult consciousness. We were in the level of maturity at that age in which the trauma was occurring. So when we can start to understand that, we start to realize, oh, this isn't about what's actually happening currently. This isn't about, say for instance, your partner triggers you because he doesn't take out the trash, and that for you it feels like he doesn't love you because he does that, for instance. That's just a surface symptom. When we can go deeper and deeper and deeper and realize, oh, this is where it comes from. This is what was happening. This is how old that part was. This is how she or he dealt with that situation in order to make it okay in this really, really difficult situation that he or she was in, right? So I want to bring this up because, again, when we're working with these parts, it's important to understand it's not actually what's happening in the present. That is just the symptoms. To the untrained eye, these aspects of self can look really dysfunctional and really painful, and we just want to chuck them out the door, right? But when we know what's happening underneath, again, we can give ourselves a break. We can start to understand what's really happening, and then we can bring compassion. And that's what Gestalt Somatic Awakening is doing. Again, it's helping us understand how these parts tick, what they do, where they come from. It's helping us to understand what was going on when they were created. And it also helps us connect with our adult consciousness. So I'd like to talk about adult consciousness because it's really important, because if we don't have adult consciousness in the room, there can be a lot of dysfunction and a lot of suffering that can happen. So adult consciousness is a higher part of ourself that has the ability to be with any part that is activated in our system by offering it acknowledgement, understanding, and compassion. And this is really important because when that happens, and when the part is actually deeply seen for where it came from and what was happening and how it's been trying to protect you, for many cases, for decades, that when it really received this level of acknowledgement and understanding and compassion, guess what happens? It softens. It's no longer as loud. It's not running the show anymore. It is actually receiving what it really wants, which is acknowledgement and healing. And this is so significant because every time you bring healing into these parts inside of you, you step more and more into freedom. Remember, we have so many different aspects in the landscape of our ego. When we bring in more healing, let's say to 5 parts, the ego softens. 10 parts, the ego softens anymore. 20 parts, there's significant softening and freedom. We're no longer being controlled by these parts. They're not driving the car of our life anymore in this really dysfunctional way. The adult and the higher self starts driving the car of our life. So as we do this, we prepare ourselves, we prepare the ground, so to speak, for these higher phases of somatic awakening, for phase 2, which can bring in incredible alchemical transformation, and phase 3, which is what happens when our higher self starts embodying in our life. And even though Gestalt Somatic Awakening is a foundational aspect of somatic awakening, and I use it a lot whenever people first begin the process of somatic awakening, it's a very, very important practice to understand and to know, because remember, we have so many different parts. And even when we go far into healing and even awakening, we are still having more and more parts come up. They get more deeper. We start with surface parts that are really running the show, and they get deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. And every time a new part comes up that feels like we're out of control, it's running the show of our life, it's driving the car. Every time that happens, we can bring it into a deep understanding and stabilization with Gestalt Somatic Awakening. So it's so important because, again, when adult consciousness is in the room, our life flows with more understanding, stability, ease, and grace. But if adult consciousness is not in the room, then a lot of dysfunction and pain and suffering can happen in our life. So next time you get triggered, know that that trigger is connected to some part of you that's actually waiting for you to fully understand it and bring it attention and love. And I know with some of those parts, it can be very, very hard because it causes a lot of pain in our life, but especially those parts, they are probably holding the deeper pain. The more pain it causes our life, I've found the more pain it's actually holding. And Gestalt Somatic Awakening, again, is a powerful way to bring understanding, healing, and stabilization into our life. Because as we do that, we step more into freedom. We step more into being the sovereign being that we are and our empowerment. And we open to receiving more and more of this divine healing love and step into trust that the process of healing, the process of awakening is happening as we move into our freedom. So, with that, what I'd like to do is to open to transmission. There are many different ascended masters who have been talking to me in regard to Gestalt Somatic Awakening, and especially in regard to adult consciousness. And so we'll see who actually shows up. It could be Isis or Mary Magdalene or Green Tara. So before we actually go there, I'm just going to ask us all to take a hydration break. The more we're hydrated, the more we can receive both the wisdom from the words as well as the energetic transmission. So here we go. Okay. So as you are ready, I invite you to close your eyes, connect in. If you are driving, I invite you to come back and to listen to this at another time, because we want to have your eyes closed. You can most deeply take in this transmission. So I'm going to be quiet for a moment, and then when I start speaking again, I will be in transmission, and we'll see who shows up and what they have to say. Okay, so this will just be a minute, and I'll come right back. I am Green Tara, and I welcome you here. We begin with the transmission of the diamond light of stabilization. This diamond light helps you to stabilize in the higher vibration where adult consciousness resides. It is a vibration that is, we'll say, above and beyond the lower mind, that is so easily connected to the ego. So inviting in this much higher, wiser part of you, this part of you that has bird's eye perspective of your life, that is resonant with the present moment, that is resonant with a stream of stabilizing wisdom that helps you ground into spacious awareness of what's actually happening as you move through your life. So we would like to open this doorway even further into what happens when one gets triggered, activated, and these parts come on board. So, anything in life, any experiences in life that are in any way similar or even perceived as somewhat similar to the original incidents that happened that cause the birthing of this part, this negative aspect of self. But when these experiences occur, these experiences that are similar, these parts become activated and they will say whatever is programmed inside of them to say. They will say, it's the other's fault. They will say, it is my fault. They will say, I need to do it better. They will say, I can never do it good enough. They will say, I must control others. They will say, I need to be perfect. They will say, I am better than, I am less than, and on it goes. When this happens, your ego and your lower mind move into a heightened awareness. Often the parts of your body, your sympathetic nervous system, fight, flight, freeze aspects will be engaged. And all of a sudden, you are in the energy vibration of either fight, flight, or freeze. And you lose perspective. As has been spoken in this process, the deepest vibration is that this part is trying to protect you. And in that process, it automatically, typically, will see other as either enemy or other as better than self. Even elevating other to the perception of higher guide, deity, king, queen, something that's much, much, much bigger and better than self. So it has this tendency to react in ways that are not true in relationship to self, in relationship to other, and in relationship to the truth in regard to what's actually happening. As you can imagine, this keeps you in lower vibrational reality. This is part of the incredible detriment that the ego has played in your life in trying to make sure that you are protected and that you survive at all cost. The adult consciousness comes in. It is like the first wave of troops, so to speak, that comes in and begins to see what's actually happening. One part at a time. Because more than that can be a bit overwhelming to your psyche and your understanding of what's happening. And the more that you begin to understand these parts and how they tick, where they came from, how they're trying to protect you, the more the adult consciousness has the ability to sustain in stabilization and awareness and love and care multiple aspects at any given time. And the more that you do this, the vibration of the adult consciousness increases, has more ability to stabilize, has more ability to understand, and has more ability to lift you up from the density of having these parts run the majority of your life. Because before this healing awareness comes in, if you've had a lot of very stressful and traumatic experiences, then more than likely, in most cases, these parts are running the majority of your life, causing stress, causing dysfunction, causing pain. So the adult consciousness is the first layer of awareness that as this grows and grows and grows and can be with more and more parts, the landscape of the psyche begins to calm, soften, relax, be at peace. And when this happens, your life feels more often calm, relaxed, softened, at peace. And the more that the higher self adult consciousness is present, when these parts get activated again, because they will until they are complete with their healing, you have more ability to turn toward them and say, oh yes, you again, I understand where you're coming from. I hear you. Let me sit with you and be your friend. Honor what you've been through and care for you. And as these parts receive this authentic care and love, they deeply receive what they need in order to take that next level of healing, of softening, of trusting enough to realize that they no longer need to run the show. They no longer need to run this energy. And oftentimes they'll realize that at this stage in one's life, that the information that they've been running is actually bad advice. This happens at the later stages of the healing process. So, beloveds, this opens the doors for you now to step into even the higher frequencies of your higher self, of your awakening, of your embodiment, so that then you can feel the deepest levels of freedom, awakening, remembering who you are, and stepping into the love that never dies. We are delighted that you are here with us on this journey, and we will continue to transmit this information, this love, this care through this spiritual modality that is here on this planet now to shift the tide and to bring in this deep, divine feminine healing into the world. Bless you. We now move to the place of completion of this transmission. And as always, we open the door so that you receive this transmission through this present time as well as through your future time. We hand to your higher self now any information that is in right alignment for you to receive with ease and grace and integration for you, always in alignment with your highest good, the law of love and the law of one. And so it is. So thank you for joining in this powerful episode of Gestalt Somatic Awakening, welcoming the adult into the room. And I look forward to continuing this journey with you. As many of you know, I am launching Sophia Healing Academy, and that is going to be the first event that's connected to that is going to be at the beginning of April. Some of you already know about it. It's called Break Free, and it's going to be an online meditation experience for 15 days starting April 3rd. And this experience is going to be live 20-minute meditations daily that will also be recorded, and it's by donation. And I feel so good about that, especially with everything that's happening in the world. So if you feel called, know that you can go to sign up for that at the website Sophia Healing Academy, all one word, Sophia with a PH, sophiahealingacademy.com/break free. And there's a lot more coming down the road, so stay tuned. And I'm so delighted and excited that you are on this journey with me. Much love and many blessings.